Well, this is going to be a little bit late. A couple weeks ago, somebody asked me to do a video about what I thought about the Olympics, and I haven't really done it because I really don't care that much about the Olympics. And maybe that's not deserved because they are actually an interesting phenomenon. I think it's one of those rare mixed bags where you can find elements that are both, um, libertarianly good and others that are bad, that are statist. Um, just to be in quick summation, from the good side, it is an organization that is not, brought about by a state. Now, maybe various states subsidize it, but it isn't like that cooperation has required some overarching world government to make it happen. We don't have a world government now. We never have. We certainly didn't when the Olympics, the modern Olympics, began back in whenever that was, 1898 or around the turn of the last century. And of course, there's also the whole not directly libertarian idea, but the whole concept of working very hard and accomplishing something. I would say rugged individualism, although that doesn't really apply so much to the team sports. But there's that, and that's all laudable. But on the other hand, they are basically very nationalistic. They play the national anthems, the flags. There's a lot of chanting, and not even specific to nationalism. There is a lot of the vicarious pleasure people take by watching the success of others. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with being entertained. I don't think there's anything wrong with watching sporting events and enjoying them, or betting on them, or taking an interest in them. But I think that it is wrong to watch athletes, or anybody else for that matter, and then to feel good about yourself or that you've done a good job or whatever. It'd be much better to maybe be inspired by acts like that and then to apply them to your own life and maybe excel or become excellent, if not in the exact sport being that you're watching, at least in some area of your life. And so in that way, I think a lot of people would be benefited if they actually played sports or worked out or did something other than just being a couch jockey. But I mean, really, I'm not that interested in the Olympics. I'm curious about it, but I was at work the whole time. In 2008, I was basically unemployed, and I actually did watch them quite a bit. But this time, I was working, and even though the tape delay was at night when I wasn't working, I really wasn't in the mood. The one thing I did watch, and this is going to be kind of a different, tangentially related to the Olympics thing, is I did get to watch some of the diving. Not all of it, but my interest was very much piqued by the English diver Tom Daley. He first really came to my attention because apparently somebody in the UK was arrested because they tweeted not even a threat. They said something like apparently Tom Daley's father died several months ago or a year ago, and somebody said something to the effect that his father wouldn't be, that he let his father down, which is a jerk thing to say, but come on. Well, anyway, that guy got basically arrested by the police, although they ultimately did not charge him with a crime. GS Debunked made a video about it, and that's actually how I learned of it, although it was all over the internet for a day or two right after it happened. Of course, that drew my attention to Tom Daley. Then his physique held my attention basically, and that was something I like to watch, just to admit that. But one thing I found interesting, to draw a totally nerdish economic lesson here, is when I was watching him in the singles, when it was just him. He did an event where he died with somebody else, which I believe they got fourth or they didn't qualify or something. And what was interesting is that he is apparently a pretty good diver. Now, I'm not a qualified judge or something like that. I don't watch it nearly enough. Unless they land on their back or on their belly, I'm not going to be able to tell you very much about how good it was, except for maybe when they slow it down. So I'm not a connoisseur of the sport enough to really judge, but based on what the announcers were saying, is he is pretty good, but he was by no means the best. The best was a Chinese guy. I mean, they would just, and it was interesting in the coverage, even though Tom Daley's from the UK and the the announcers that I was listening to are Americans. They were definitely have showing more interest towards him than they were towards this Chinese guy. I don't remember his name, who was demonstrably better. I mean, this was they would say, well, he's dominating, and Tom Daley's like in the running. I actually didn't see the end. I think eventually he got third in at least one of the events. I don't know how many different single diving events there are. I think there's several though, and it's interesting because I got to thinking Tom Daley probably is a really good diver, and he, after I spent some time researching him, he's basically a big celebrity in the UK. He's pretty famous, and he's on covers of lots of magazines, and he's always being interviewed on television. And he wrote a book, although one wonders if he really wrote the book or so. It was not ghost written, or maybe that he credited somebody else. I don't know, but basically, his career, his job is worth a lot of money. He is a millionaire, or will be earning in the millions, very likely, if he hasn't already. And it was interesting because this Chinese fellow, although I didn't look it up, I highly doubt that he will earn nearly that much, despite the fact that he is almost certainly a better diver, a much better diver. And this got me thinking into the idea that it's a good example of what determines wages. Now, Tom Daley doesn't make a wage in the way that most of us imagine. You get a job and you get paid an hourly rate or a day rate or something like that. His income is not going to be that way, most likely. It's going to be endorsements, it's going to be book deals, it's going to be television appearances, and Speedo is probably going to want to have a deal with him, and whatever else, or somebody, or toothbrushes or shaving, all kinds, Subway, whoever. But that still doesn't mean it's still people are valuing his contribution, and we can set a dollar amount to that. And I think the difference between him and this Chinese guy is that the Chinese guy is from China, where most people are basically poor. I mean, the vast majority of Chinese are subsistence farmers still, even though there are several 100 million who are urbanites at this point. But even among them, they don't have tons of disposable income, and what they do have is not likely going to be directed towards one of China's many Olympic athletes. Whereas Tom Daley lives in a society that's vastly more wealthy per capita, the people of which have enough disposable income that they can basically patronize things like spending money on buying a book by basically a teenager who's not any kind of literary phenomenon, but just a celebrity who's a really cute diver. And it shows that the wages that they earn aren't determined by them. It's not that they get to decide how much they get paid, and it's also not how much their employers decide, because the employers are not, whoever the contractors are not going to pay millions and millions of dollars in these cases just because they're nice. They're paying it because, in their estimation, the increased sales they can get from consumers will be worth even more. So if someone figures that, just as an example, if Wheaties thinks that putting Tom Daley on their cereal boxes, on their Wheaties boxes, will generate $1 million in additional revenue for them, in additional profit, ignoring the fact that there's money expending into the boxes, but say they think it would give them $1 million more in profit, then we know that the maximum they're going to be willing to pay to have him agree to be on their boxes is $1 million. They wouldn't pay him 2, they wouldn't pay him 3, they wouldn't pay him $1,100,000. They would pay him at maximum $1 million. Now, of course, they would try and get him for less than that. They'd probably offer him hundreds of thousands or something like that. But he would have the opportunity cost to say, look, Wheaties, if you're not willing to pay me $1 million, I'm sure General Mills or Kellogg's or whoever other brands are out there are willing to pay me that much, and so why should I waste my time with you? But so there is a rhyme or reason, but it's basically based on the subjective valuation of the consumers. And this is to go back to, it is the consumers who are determining what the wage rates really are. They're the ones who are determining how valuable whatever the contribution of the producer is. And this is as true as it is for celebrity athletes like Tom Daley or Michael Phelps as it is for sneakers, cars, dog food, or whatever other good or service you can talk about, as long as the government isn't setting wage and price controls, which, sad to say, is the case for far too many industries. And of course, even one industry would be far too many, but we're way past that stage. So it is the fact that the market in the UK is willing to pay a decent amount of money just to have some ancillary connection to Tom Daley or whoever other athletes, that he is able to command the salaries that he can. And the fact that there are other people who might be better divers, like this Chinese fellow, and actually I think an American beat him as well, is irrelevant, because for whatever reason, that celebrity of that Chinese guy is not that highly valued in China as it is for in the UK for someone like Tom Daley. And so even though he's going to get the gold, or I should say it's mostly not gold, but he's going to win first place and is probably demonstrably a better diver, although I don't know if maybe he's older and more experienced. I just don't know. Tom is only a teenager. I think he's like 17 or 18. It's the consumers who are deciding what their wages are. It's not the employers, it's not the employee, it's the consumers. They're the ones who are deciding how valuable it is. And then there's an arbitrage there between the employers and the employees. If the maximum Tom Daley could ever bring a firm through whatever services he offers, typically it's just going to be his endorsement of whatever product, is $1 million, then that's the maximum they're going to pay. If they pay more than that, that's an error on their part. And at some point they're going to realize, okay, we pay Tom Daley $1.5 million to be on our Wheaties boxes, and we can, as far as we can tell, only attribute $1 million in increased sales. So that's a net loss of $500,000. We made a mistake. We're going to either renegotiate the contract or not renew it or whatever else. On the other hand, if they pay him far less than that and he agrees to it, at some point he's going to realize, okay, Wheaties is paying me $200,000, but I've been getting other offers, and they will bid up the price to try and get my services, is up to the point that the consumers are willing to pay. And that's a pretty complicated thing, and it's also not set in stone. So if Tom Daley in the next Olympics, assuming he participates in them, which who knows, but assume that he did, if he were to say win the gold or be win several world championships between now and then, which are kind of like the mainstay of these events that happen between the Olympics, how valuable he could be changing all the time. Or it could be that consumers just lose interest. Maybe something happens, like he gets caught smoking pot or something like that, and then even though his diving skills aren't in question, people might just say we don't want to associate with him, where we don't want to buy a box of cereal that has him on there. I think that's exactly what happened to Michael Phelps. And of course, there's a hilarious meme. This is totally unrelated. There's a hilarious meme showing Michael Phelps wearing all of his medals, and it said, "Don't do drugs, kid. You might end up winning more gold medals than anybody ever." And Michael Phelps had an opportunity there to really speak out about ludicrous drug laws, and he did not. I guess he had a financial stake in it, so I can't criticize him too much for that. But that's totally a different aside. But there's a tendency for people to kind of view wages that aren't like getting a weekly check as somehow radically different, and they're really not in principle. More people are interested and willing to watch and pay to watch, say, a basketball game than watch Olympic swimming. And so even though Michael Phelps is the greatest swimmer in history by most rubrics that you're going to select, swimming is just not as popular as the NBA. And so even though there's basically every NBA player, none of them could probably have the title of best basketball player in history. Maybe one or two of them. I'm not a basketball fan, so I couldn't tell. But the vast majority of them don't. They still, by and large, are going to command far, far higher salaries than he ever will. I mean, he makes pretty good money as far as I know, but not top billing NBA money or top billing uh, NBL or even NFL. But uh, it's a formula based on how much the consumers are willing to subjectively value uh, whatever it is that they're providing. And in this case, the objectiveness of their skill set is, I mean, it probably relates, but there's no absolute relation. So um, Tom Daley is basically the darling of the British media. Even if he had only gotten fourth, he'd still be a celebrity, and people would still want to be talking about him, and so there'd still be a demand for his uh, his brand, so to speak, his name, his goods and his services. Even if he's not demonstrably the best diver in the world, which apparently he's not. So that's basically all I wanted to say. Wages are determined by consumers ultimately, uh, not by the employers certainly, and not by the employees. Except to the, I mean, there's a reciprocity there. Tom Daley could say, "Well, I want to make more, and so I'm going to train really hard and just not only win, but also cultivate the persona I think will maximize my appeal to the broadest audience," which I think a lot of athletes do actually try and do. Or a lot of athletes, that's part of their success, and maybe it's just an ancillary thing. They're not even trying to do it, but they just have the right personality to become appealing to people, and so that augments in a way, in a very complicated way, what their value is, much more than just how many points they score, whatever physical traits uh, they have developed for their sport. So uh, I well, I don't want to get too explicit there, but uh, that's it. The end. As far as the Olympics go, I mean, I really don't care that much. Um, there's a lot of eye candy, I guess, but beyond that, I don't think it's something to get worked up about. And it's just disgusting to see people take vicarious pleasure in the accomplishments of others, and the whole chanting USA or whatever other country. That's just silly. It is kind of also a weird thing that a lot of, I don't want to say failed states, but states that are consciously trying to demonstrate their worth see the Olympics as one way to qualify or quantify their value. This is the actually one of the eternal problems with states is, since they're not based on any kind of mutual exchange, but rather taxation and theft. Uh, but there's a strong need for them to show, to ideologically be seen as legitimate. So they have to somehow show, okay, well, yeah, we're taxing you, but we're great. This is why. And the Olympics is not the main way that they do that. The main way they do that is through demonstrations of martial ability, through either direct conquest or demonstrating an ability to resist potential conquest. And that's the main way. And there's other ways too. But I think somewhere on that list, states like to say, oh, well, we won a lot of gold medals. And a lot of the Eastern Bloc countries, especially East Germany, the Soviet Union, and China, are kind of, this is one of the avenues I think they value pretty high. I know the Chinese government offers major incentives for people who can win medals. Now, if someone wins a medal for China, it doesn't help the Chinese people so much, except to the point that they feel better about it. But it's something the state can go to and like, look, we're doing great because look at all the gold medals we won. Although apparently they won quite a few fewer when the Olympics weren't in Beijing. Go figure there. So in the United States government, the people here are affluent enough that the United States government does not need to point to the Olympics to legitimize itself. And so it typically doesn't. I mean, politicians still say things to that effect, but they don't really stress it in a way that, say, East Germany might, or there's other little examples. I've always heard the dictator, the president for life of Gabon, which is a fairly wealthy equatorial country in equatorial Africa, wealthy in the sense that it has lots of natural resources, has promised unfathomable riches to anyone who can win a medal. Why would he do that other than to flaunt the greatness of his country? Apparently it's never happened either. So maybe if Michael Phelps wants to move to Gabon, he can become you know, he could probably have basically his own little private estate there with whatever. He could probably afford that anyway at this point. So anyway, that's pretty much it, and I'll talk to y'all later.